June 13th is a date that should be marked in red on the calendar of British criminal history. It represents a chilling coincidence that investigators initially wrote off as chance, but which would later unravel a conspiracy spanning the entire continent. On June 13, 2018, in Ashton-under-Lyne, Greater Manchester, the air was shattered by gunfire. Luke Graham, a father and local figure in the drug trade, was sitting in his white van when he was ambushed. He was shot 5 times and killed instantly. The horror was not just in the violence but in the aftermath. His killer did not panic. He did not flee into the woods or speed off in a frenzy. Instead, he walked calmly to a local pub less than an hour later, acting as if he had not just taken a human life. Fast forward exactly 2 years to June 13, 2020. The location shifts south to Roydon in Essex, but the method is terrifyingly identical. Robert Powell, a grandfather and music manager, was outside a party when he was targeted. He was shot 8 times, collapsing beside a car in broad daylight. Just like in Manchester, the shooters vanished within seconds. These were 2 executions, committed on the same day of the year, in 2 different cities, by 2 entirely different hitmen. Both murders happened in front of witnesses, and both killers seemingly evaporated into thin air, leaving British police looking powerless for years. In the modern surveillance age, vanishing is supposed to be impossible. The United Kingdom is one of the most watched nations on Earth, with an estimated 6 million CCTV cameras observing public spaces. Your phone tracks your movements, your bank card maps your life, your car's license plate is scanned 1,000 times a day. To commit a murder in broad daylight and successfully disappear requires more than just luck. It requires professional infrastructure. For a long time, police believed these hitmen were simply lying low, perhaps hiding in the attics of terrified relatives, or moving between safe houses in Shaipan, the countryside. But the truth was far more sophisticated and far more disturbing. What if I told you that these 2 killers, who had never met and operated in different criminal underworlds, did not just run separately, they were utilizing the same exclusive service. They had purchased a ticket on a criminal underground railroad, a highly organized escape network operating out of Spain. This was not a favor asked of a friend. It was a business transaction. For a fee of £50,000, a British fugitive coordinator would make a killer disappear. This shadow broker provided false documents, safe houses, and new identities, effectively erasing the past. Between 2009 and 2022, this coordinator helped 35 of Britain's most dangerous criminals escape justice. He built a £6 million empire on the premise that for the right price, you could get away with murder. This story is not just about 2 hitmen. It exposes the mechanics of how the UK's most wanted vanish. And the most terrifying part, while some have been caught, the files reveal that 21 of those fugitives are still out there living among us, invisible and free. Before Nana Oppong became the face on wanted posters across Europe, he was a legend in the dark corners of East London's underworld. In these circles, fear is a currency, and Oppong was a rich man. They called him the Teflon Man. It was not a compliment born of affection. It was a grudging admission of his uncanny ability to evade justice. No matter how much violence surrounded him, no matter how much blood was spilled in his presence, the charges simply slid off him. To understand the murder of Robert Powell, you first have to understand the man who ordered it, a man who had convinced himself he was untouchable. The legend of the Teflon Man began in earnest on May 2010 at the Sugar Lounge nightclub. What was supposed to be Oppong's birthday celebration descended into a chaotic massacre. Outside the venue, rival factions clashed in a hail of bullets. Eugene Brown and Patrick Ford were shot dead. Michael Smith was shot 6 times, including a round to the head, yet miraculously survived. Police were convinced Oppong was the conductor of this violence, alleging he had armed one of the gunmen and identified the victims moments before the firing started. He stood trial for murder twice. The result? 2 hung juries. The Crown Prosecution Service, unable to secure a verdict, had to settle for a conviction of perverting the course of justice. He served a brief sentence and walked free in 2012, his reputation on the street growing to mythic proportions. But the violence did not stop. In May 2014, another birthday party in Dagenham ended in tragedy. Ashley Latty, a young father, was set upon outside a community hall. It was described by prosecutors as a frenzied attack, a blur of kicking, punching, and stabbing. Oppong was right there in the mix, charged with murder alongside others. Yet, once again, the murder charge did not stick. He admitted only to causing grievous bodily harm, GBH with intent. He received a 4-year sentence and was released early. Detectives saw a clear, frustrating pattern. Whenever extreme violence erupted in East London, Oppong's name was in the files, whispered by informants, but never cemented by evidence. He was careful, disciplined, and dangerously detached. He rarely pulled the trigger himself. He was the architect, not the bricklayer. By the late 2010s, police viewed him as a phantom steeped in the world of drugs, guns, and revenge, yet seemingly immune to the law. In 2020, however, that illusion of immunity would finally fracture. The target this time was Robert Powell, a 50-year-old known as Fox in London's music scene. Powell was a different kind of target. He was not a street soldier or a rival enforcer. He was a music manager, a father of 3, and a grandfather. He worked with up-and-coming artists, including the well-known rapper Dutchavelli. Powell was respected, a man who navigated the grey areas where the glamorous music industry overlaps with the gritty reality of the streets. In this world, reputation means everything. A single slight, an unpaid debt, or a rumor can spiral into a death sentence. By 2020, the line between music management and organized crime had blurred completely. Powell's name began to cross into conversations involving Oppong's network, a group deeply entrenched in class, a drug supply, and violent territorial disputes. Police believe Oppong harbored a personal grudge against Powell. While the exact catalyst remains a shadow, the intent was clear. Powell had been marked for death, and unlike the chaotic brawls of the past, this would be a calculated, military-style execution. The assassination of Robert Powell was not a crime of passion. It was a military operation, planned with chilling precision. Weeks before the shooting, Powell had told friends he was being watched, sensing the eyes of the underworld on him. He was right. Encrypted messages later recovered by police revealed that Nana Oppong and his associates were tracking Powell's every move, hunting for the perfect kill zone. They almost struck on June 5, 2020, at a block party in Beckton, East London. The hit squad was in position, weapons ready, but the job was aborted at the last second. Message traffic revealed Oppong was spooked by the presence of police in the area. They were predators, yes, but cautious ones. They postponed the violence, waiting for a moment when the odds were entirely in their favor. That moment arrived on June 13, 2020. At 4:58 a.m. Powell had been attending a private party on Water Lane in Roydon, Essex. It was a scene of celebration music, food, familiar faces, but outside, a convoy of death was circling. 3 vehicles had closed in, a Ford Cougar, with cloned plates serving as the strike vehicle, a Vauxhall Zafira carrying the backup crew, and a Toyota Prius driven by Israr Shah acting as the lookout. CCTV footage would later show this convoy circling the area like sharks, waiting for Powell to emerge. When he finally stepped out with his 2 sons, the Cougar slowed. The passenger door opened, and a gunman believed to be Oppong stepped out with a 9mm pistol. He fired 8 rounds in quick succession. Powell was hit repeatedly and collapsed beside a parked car. The violence was so indiscriminate that 2 innocent women standing nearby were also shot, 1 bullet passing completely through a victim before lodging in another's ankle. The shooters sped off, vanishing into the Essex morning. Under normal circumstances, this might have remained a cold case, another unsolvable gangland slaying. But the criminals made one fatal error: they trusted technology they did not control. They were users of EncroChat. For years, EncroChat was the gold standard for organized crime communication. These were not standard smartphones. They were modified devices costing thousands of pounds, with GPS, cameras and microphones physically disabled, running a hidden operating system designed solely for encrypted messaging. Criminals used them with absolute impunity, discussing murder plots as casually as one might discuss a grocery list. Convinced that law enforcement could never crack the code, they were wrong. In a stunning intelligence coup, French and Dutch police breached the EncroChat servers in June 2020, effectively wiretapping 60,000 criminals across Europe simultaneously. When British investigators gained access to this data, it was like turning on the lights in a dark room. 2 user handles stood out immediately: Enzes and Slick. Police quickly identified Enzes as Nana Oppong and Slick as his lookout, Israr Shah. The digital trail was devastatingly clear. The messages showed ENZ ordering 9mm ammunition days before the murder. On the night of the aborted Beckton attack, Slick messaged, "I am sick of the acting, bro," expressing frustration at the delay. On the night of the murder, the timestamps of their messages aligned perfectly with the CCTV footage of the convoy. Hours after Powell lay dead, Oppong sent a final, chilling message, "All clear. Handle your side." 2 days later, Oppong's handset was remotely wiped to standard protocol for hitmen after a job. But it was too late. The server had already captured the data. The Teflon Man had left digital fingerprints that no amount of bleach or silence could scrub away. Investigators now had the evidence to put him away for life. But when they moved to make the arrest, they found only empty houses. Oppong, Shah, and a third associate had vanished. They had already activated the escape plan. While Nana Oppong was navigating the treacherous underworld of East London, a different but equally violent conflict was reaching its boiling point 200 miles north in Greater Manchester. It was June 2018, exactly 2 years before Robert Powell would fall in Essex. The setting was Tameside, a battleground for a vicious turf war over the lucrative cocaine and cannabis trade. On one side was Luke Graham, a 31-year-old father of 2, known locally as Tank. He was loyal, impulsive, and trying to carve out his own slice of the market. On the other side was Wade Cox, a ruthless dealer with a larger crew and a reputation for enforcing his will through extreme violence. Cox was not interested in sharing territory. He wanted total control. By June, the warnings had stopped and the planning had begun. Cox and his right-hand man, Callum Halpin, devised a trap that was as simple as it was brutal. They used a local drug user, known by the nickname Peanut, as live bait. Messages were sent to Graham claiming that Peanut was in trouble, threatened by rival dealers at a house on Birch Street. It was a classic distress call, designed to exploit Graham's loyalty. He took the bait. At 4:40 p.m., Graham arrived in a white Volkswagen Caddy van, bringing his friend Anton Verigotta for backup. They had no idea they were driving into a kill box. Waiting for them in a stolen silver Audi A3 were Wade Cox and Callum Halpin. As Graham sat in the passenger seat of his van, the trap snapped shut. Halpin burst from the Audi, rushing the van's side door and slamming it shut to prevent any escape. In that split second of confusion, Wade Cox raised a handgun and fired 5 shots through the window from point-blank range. 3 bullets struck Graham, killing him instantly. Another hit Verigotta, who survived but was left with life-altering injuries. The entire ambush took less than 60 seconds. The Audi screeched away, leaving silence and smoke in its wake. But it is what happened next that truly separates the professional criminal from the desperate amateur. After torching the getaway car to destroy DNA and gunshot residue, Callum Halpin did not go into hiding, at least. Not yet. Less than an hour after participating in a daylight execution, he was spotted on CCTV, entering the corner shop pub in Ashton. He sat at the bar, ordered a drink, and scrolled through his phone, looking as bored as a man waiting for a bus. Later that day, he was seen chatting at a local gym, laughing with acquaintances. This level of detachment is what psychologists call compartmentalization, the terrifying ability to lock a violent act in a mental box and carry on with daily life as if it never happened. To Halpin, the murder was not a traumatic event. It was just a Tuesday afternoon task that had been completed. But while Halpin was drinking his beer, Operation Cranbrook was already spinning up. Police were pulling apart the cell site data, tracking the burner phones, and connecting the dots between Cox and Halpin. Cox was eventually arrested and sentenced to life with a minimum of 36 years. But Halpin, sensing the heat rising, did exactly what Nana Oppong would do 2 years later. He vanished. He did not just run. He accessed a professional network designed to make men like him invisible. By 2021, the investigations into the murders of Robert Powell and Luke Graham seemed to be running on parallel, unconnected tracks. One was a Metropolitan Police case involving London gangs. The other was a Greater Manchester police operation focused on northern drug turf. But at the headquarters of the National Crime Agency, NCA, analysts were looking at the bigger picture. When they began cross-referencing fugitive intelligence, a startling pattern emerged. Nana Oppong and Callum Halpin, men from different cities, different generations, and different criminal networks, had followed an identical script to freedom. The data points were too precise to be coincidental. Both men had fled the UK within days of their respective crimes, slipping through the dragnet before borders could be locked down. Both had utilized high-quality false documents to bypass port security. Both had entered Spain through the same gateway, Valencia. And most damningly, both had settled in the exact same region, the sun-drenched coast of Alicante and the Costa del Sol. For decades, the British press has dubbed this region the Costa del Crime. Historically, the lack of an extradition treaty between Spain and the UK in the mid-20th century made it a sanctuary for British robbers and fraudsters. Although those treaties have long since been signed, the infrastructure of the underworld remains. It is a place where English is spoken in every bar, where British currency is easily laundered, and where a man can blend into a transient population of tourists and expats without raising an eyebrow. It is the perfect ecosystem for a fugitive. But Oppong and Halpin were not just random beneficiaries of this environment, they were tenants of the same landlord. Property records showed that Halpin's last known hideout, a nondescript apartment near Alicante, and the addresses linked to Oppong's movements were rented through the same UK-based shell company. Financial investigators traced payments from both fugitives to a single money transfer service operated by a British expat on the coast. They even used the same source for their forged documents. A specialist operating out of Malaga who could produce passports that passed casual inspection. The investigation, which had started as a hunt for two separate killers, suddenly morphed into a hunt for the man pulling the strings. The evidence pointed to a single ghost coordinator, a shadowy figure who acted as a travel agent for the underworld. His name was Marcus Donnelly. Originally from Liverpool, Donnelly had fled the UK himself in 2009 to avoid a drug trafficking sentence. Instead of keeping his head down, he had entrepreneurialized his exile. He realized that the one thing every criminal eventually needs is an exit strategy. The realization hit the NCA team with the force of a revelation. Oppong and Halpin were not just running blindly, they were premium clients of a specialized criminal service. Like calling an Uber, except instead of a ride across town, you purchased a new life in Spain. The discovery of Donnelly's involvement meant that the police were not just looking for needles in a banged haystack. They had found the man who built the haystack, and if Donnelly was hiding these two, the question immediately became, who else was he hiding? The scope of the investigation exploded, from 2 murders to a potential list of dozens of the UK's most dangerous men, all shielded by the same invisible hand. If Nana Oppong was the Teflon Man, and Callum Halpin was the daylight executioner, Marcus Donnelly was the architect. At 52 years old, this Liverpool native did not look like a criminal mastermind. He looked like any other British expat, enjoying early retirement on the Spanish coast. Tanned, relaxed, blending into the background of beach bars and golf courses. But behind this facade, Donnelly was running the most sophisticated fugitive support network in Europe. He had fled the UK in 2009 to escape a drug trafficking conviction, and in the decade that followed, he had turned his own fugitive status into a business model. He understood a fundamental truth about crime. Getting away with the act is easy. Surviving the aftermath is expensive. Donnelly operated like a concierge for the desperate. His service was not a favor. It was a high-end subscription package. The entry fee was a flat £50,000. This initial placement fee covered the essentials: a high-quality forged passport, often Maltese or Irish to blend into the EU, a driver's license that could pass a traffic stop, and a birth certificate to backstop the identity. But the genius of Donnelly's operation was the recurring revenue. He charged a maintenance fee of £10,000 per month. For that £10,000, clients received more than just a roof over their heads. They got a ghost life. Donnelly arranged safe houses through a labyrinth of shell companies and cash handshake deals with corrupt landlords, ensuring no paper trail ever linked a property to a fugitive's real name. He provided money transfer services that bypassed the banking system entirely, using Hawala-style networks where cash deposited in London would magically appear in Alicante, minus a hefty commission. He offered border crossing advice, tipping off clients about which ports had lax security on specific days, or which customs officials could be bribed. Living under a false identity is a psychological endurance test. You can never use your real name, never call your family on an open line, never relax. Donnelly sold peace of mind. He was the safety net. If the police got too close to a safe house, his network would know. For an additional emergency relocation fee, he could move a fugitive to a new city, with new documents and a new backstory, within hours. Between 2009 and 2022, Donnelly's client list grew to include 35 of the UK's most wanted. Murderers, drug kingpins and gang leaders all owed their freedom to him. He built a business estimated at £6 million, effectively an industrial-scale fugitive processing plant. He was not just hiding criminals, he was enabling them. By providing a reliable escape hatch, he emboldened men like Oppong and Halpin to commit more brazen crimes, secure in the knowledge that the Liverpool guy could make them disappear. But in building this empire, Donnelly made the classic mistake of the ambitious CEO. He kept records, and those records would eventually become the roadmap for his own destruction. By late 2021, the hunt had evolved. The National Crime Agency, NCA, and Essex Police had formed an international task force, a digital and physical dragnet, spanning 3 countries. The days of local bobbies chasing local lads were over. This was high-stakes geopolitical poker. Interpol red notices were issued, flashing the faces of Nana Oppong and Callum Halpin across border, control screens from Madrid to Marrakesh. The message was simple. These men are armed, dangerous, and desperate. The first domino to fall was the man who thought he was smartest. Nana Oppong, the Teflon Man, had grown restless. Perhaps he felt the walls closing in on the Costa del Sol. Or perhaps he simply needed new territory. In September 2022, he attempted to cross from Spain into Morocco via the port of Tangier. He presented a Maltese passport to the border control officer, a dog Mickey, high-quality forgery provided by Donnelly's network. But border security is a game of human intuition as much as technology. The officer looked at the photo, then at the man. Something was off. The face did not quite match the document's history. A standard fingerprint check was initiated. Within seconds, the biometric database screamed the truth. This was not a Maltese tourist. This was Nana Oppong, wanted for murder, firearms offences, and drug trafficking. After 2 years on the run, the Teflon coating had finally been scratched away by a routine check at a ferry terminal. Meanwhile, back in Spain, the net was tightening around Callum Halpin. He had spent 4 years as a ghost, living under false names and moving between safe houses. He had even been spotted living alongside other high-profile fugitives, including Alex Mail, one of the UK's most wanted drug traffickers. But Operation Captura, a relentless campaign by the NCA and Crime Stoppers targeting British fugitives in Spain, had made his face famous. His mugshot was plastered on beer mats, billboards and social media feeds across the expatriate community. On May 30th, 2022, the endgame arrived. Acting on precise intelligence, Spanish National Police surrounded a nondescript property near Alicante. This was not a polite knock at the door. Heavily armed tactical units breached the apartment, moving with the speed and violence of a thunderclap. Inside, they found Callum Halpin. The man who had once casually sipped a beer an hour after a murder was now cornered in a small room, offering no resistance. He was arrested on a European arrest warrant, his years of evasion ending in handcuffs and a flight back to the UK. But the most significant strike was not against the killers, it was against the architect. In June 2022, coordinating perfectly with Halpin's arrest, Spanish police raided Marcus Donnelly's operation on the Costa del Sol. When they kicked down the door, they did not just find a criminal, they found the archives of the underworld. Inside Donnelly's headquarters was a treasure trove of evidence that prosecutors dream of. Client files listing 35 British fugitives assisted over a decade, financial ledgers detailing nearly £3 million in placement fees alone, and templates for every type of forged document imaginable. The raid dismantled the Underground Railroad in a single afternoon. The travel agency for murderers was officially closed for business. The wheels of justice turned slowly, but when they finally crushed the Teflon Man and the Daylight Executioner, the weight was immense. In May 2024, At Woolwich Crown Court, Nana Oppong and Isra Shah stood in the dock, stripped of their street power and their digital anonymity. The prosecution presented a mountain of evidence. The EncroChat messages, the CCTV, tracking the convoy, the forensic ballistics. Oppong tried to claim he was not Enzi, and Shah claimed he was just there to deal drugs, not murder. The jury did not buy a word of it. On May 28, 2024, the verdicts were delivered. Nana Oppong, the man who had dodged murder charges twice before, was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 38 years. Isra Shah received life with a minimum of 26 years. A year earlier, in February 2023, Callum Halpin had faced his own reckoning at Manchester Crown Court. The judge described his crime as a public execution carried out in pursuit of control and fear. Halpin was handed a life sentence with a minimum of 30 years, and in September 2023, a Spanish court sentenced the architect, Marcus Donnelly, to 18 years for operating a criminal organization. Combined, these men were handed 144 years of prison time. It felt like a clean ending. Justice served, cases closed, the monsters locked away. But that sense of closure is a dangerous illusion. Because when investigators finally cracked the encryption on Marcus Donnelly's client files, the celebration turned into a cold realization. Donnelly had not just helped Oppong and Halpin. His ledgers listed 35 British fugitives he had processed between 2009 and 2022. The breakdown of this list reads like a horror story. 12 wanted for murder or attempted murder, 8 for large-scale drug trafficking, 7 for firearms offences, and 3 for sexual offences. As of 2024, only 14 of those names have been crossed off the list, arrested, and extradited. That leaves a terrifying mathematical remainder. 21 dangerous fugitives are still at large. These are the legacy clients of Marcus Donnelly's agency. They are men who purchased their freedom before the raid, men who are still holding the high-quality forged passports Donnelly provided, still living in the safe houses he arranged, and still utilizing the rat runs he mapped out. The architect is in a Spanish prison cell, but the building he constructed is still standing. These 21 ghosts are out there right now, perhaps sitting at a cafe in Marbella, perhaps renting a villa next to unsuspecting tourists, or perhaps they have moved on, using their fake identities to cross into new continents. Donnelly built a business estimated at £6 million by selling invisibility. He charged £170,000 per fugitive per year to keep them hidden. The police have dismantled the headquarters, but the product, the anonymity, is still in circulation. The question that keeps detectives awake at night is simple. How do you catch 21 men who have been professionally erased from the grid? This manhunt is not over. It has simply entered a new, more difficult phase. The police have the names, but the targets are in the wind. So, the next time you see a quiet British expat keeping to himself in a sun-drenched European town, ask yourself, is he just enjoying his retirement? Or is he one of the 21? The files are open. The hunt continues. And as this story proves, no matter how fast you run, or how much you pay, eventually, the past always catches up,